Joey, the Kangaroo King by Jansen Davies. Chapter 1. The Auditor's Oversight. The royal archives of Solarnia were a marvel of bureaucratic excess, vaults of crystalline data towers humming with 1,000 years of interplanetary abductions, catalogued by species, emotional temperament, and snack preference. It was here, beneath the flickering glow of 1,000 audit drones, that Glintor Lex, Royal Auditor Third Class, sipped his moonroot tea and prepared to ruin his own life. He had been reviewing the Earth files, always a mess, always full of emotional humans and their inconvenient moral objections, when a blinking red alert caught his eye. It wasn't a system error. It was worse. "No Australians," he whispered. He tapped the crystal again. Still no Australians. Not one. Not a single entry from the continent that Earthlings called Down Under, which, according to Solarnian maps, was just way down. Glintor's 3 hearts thudded in unison. Australia was the smallest of Earth's 7 continents, yes. It was isolated, yes. But it was still a continent. And King Loffrey, the third of his name, had made it very clear. Every continent, every species, every flavor of Earthling. Glintor remembered the last time someone had failed the king. A court jester had flubbed the punchline to a joke about quantum socks and was exiled to Cryo Moon 7, where laughter was illegal and the air smelled faintly of wet predators. He considered lying. He considered fleeing. He considered faking his own abduction. But none of those options involved surviving. Instead, he summoned the Council of Elders. They arrived in robes of ceremonial panic, muttering about budget cuts and the ethics of abducting creatures who wore flip-flops year-round. "I've discovered a grave omission," Glintor said, voice trembling. "Australia. We've never taken anyone from Australia." The room fell silent. Elder Thorn blinked slowly. "What's an Australia?" "It's a continent," Glintor said. "Southern Hemisphere, known for heat, sarcasm, and creatures that defy evolutionary logic." Elder Vula frowned. "Didn't we take someone from New Zealand once?" "That's not the same," Glintor hissed. "New Zealand is the poetic cousin. Australia is the chaotic sibling." The council murmured. This was bad, very bad. The king prided himself on having the most complete abductee collection in the known universe. Humans, aliens, hybrids, sentient fog. He had them all. But no Australians. "We must act," said Elder Thorn, "quietly, before His Majesty notices." "A small fleet," Glintor suggested. 5 ships, 1 Australian, in and out. "Do we know what they look like?" asked Elder Vula. Glintor hesitated. "There's conflicting data. Some sources say they wear shorts in blizzards. Others claim they wrestle crocodiles recreationally." Elder Thorn stroked his beard. "Sounds formidable." The vote was unanimous. The mission was approved. The ships would depart within the hour. Glintor watched them launch from the palace spire, 5 gleaming vessels streaking toward Earth's red center. He felt a flicker of hope. Surely, he thought, nothing could go wrong with abducting a single Australian. He was wrong. Chapter 2. Mission, Australia. The fleet departed Solarnia under the cover of bureaucratic silence, 5 ships streaking toward Earth's southern hemisphere like a committee trying to avoid accountability. Each vessel was equipped with standard abduction gear, neural nets, mood-calibrated translator orbs, and a complimentary welcome basket curated by the Ministry of Intergalactic Hospitality, mostly dried plankton and motivational stickers. Captain Zorn of the lead ship, the Compliance Falcon, reviewed the mission briefing with a grimace. Target, 1 typical Australian. Parameters, sun-resistant, emotionally resilient, possibly leathery. His crew stared at the holographic map of Earth, which displayed Australia as a vaguely angry-looking landmass surrounded by sharks and sarcasm. Any intel on their behavior? Asked Lieutenant Vree. Unclear, Zorn replied. Some reports suggest they drink something called flat white and refer to close friends as mate. Others claim they communicate exclusively through a giant blow tube. The ships pierced Earth's atmosphere above the continent's red center, where the scanners immediately began to malfunction. No cities, said the navigator. No humans. Just heat, brush, and something hopping. Zarn squinted at the screen. Hopping? Fast, muscular, upright, definitely Australian. The crew prepared for landing. 10 officers disembarked armed with stun batons and a vague sense of genetic superiority. They fanned out across the dry terrain, eyes scanning for signs of intelligent life. Then they saw it. A creature emerged from the brush, standing tall on 2 legs, its tail swaying like a pendulum of judgment. Its eyes gleamed with ancient fury. Its feet were the size of bureaucratic shame. "That's it," whispered Zorn. "That's our Australian." The crew encircled the creature, attempting a non-violent capture. They activated the translator orb, which emitted a polite beep and then exploded. The creature tilted its head. Then it attacked. It moved like a comet. One kick sent Lieutenant Vree flying into a eucalyptus tree. Another flattened the communications officer into a dusty pancake. Within 30 seconds, the entire crew was defeated. Zorn, bruised and humbled, crawled forward and bowed. "By Solarnian law," he gasped, "you are now our leader." The creature blinked. Zorn pointed to the ship. "Yours." The Kangaroo hopped aboard. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Visitor. Captain Zorn had seen many things in his tenure with the Solarnian fleet: sentient fog that quoted Shakespeare, a wormhole that sold insurance, and once a planet that screamed when you complimented it. But nothing prepared him for the creature now sitting in the command chair of the Compliance Falcon. It was massive, muscular, regal in its own chaotic way. Its fur shimmered under the ship's ambient lighting. Its tail curled around the base of the chair like a throne accessory, and it was chewing something, possibly a leaf, possibly one of the crew members' ears. The crew stood at attention, bruised and reverent. By Solarnian law, any being who defeated a ship's crew in trial by combat was entitled to command. The Kangaroo had not just won, it had dominated. With feet like battering rams and a gaze that suggested it had no time for nonsense, it had earned their loyalty. "Awaiting orders, your lordship," Zorn offered, unsure of the proper title for a marsupial commander. The Kangaroo blinked. Then it hopped once, decisively, toward the navigation console. "Coordinates locked," said the navigator. "Destination, Solarnia." The ship jumped to hyperspace. Back on Solarnia, Royal Auditor Glintor Lex paced the landing bay like a man awaiting his own execution. The other 4 ships had returned, each with similar stories: failed captures, mysterious defeats, and one crew who swore they'd been outwitted by a creature that moved slower than a Martian sandworm. Then came the Compliance Falcon. Royal Auditor Glintor Lex was waiting, flanked by 2 junior archivists and a therapy drone set to mild panic. He watched the hatch open. He saw the creature hop out, and he knew instantly that the mission had failed. "That's not a human," he whispered. "That's a kangaroo." Captain Zorn saluted. "He defeated us in trial by combat. By Solarnian law, he is our new commanding officer." Glintor's mouth twitched. He considered reporting the error. He considered fleeing to the moon where laughter was banned. He considered pretending to be a shrub. Instead, he bowed. "Welcome to Solarnia, noble Australian." The Kangaroo blinked once, then hopped past him without ceremony. It moved through the palace halls like it had lived there for centuries, ignoring the gasps of courtiers and the fainting of a minor duke. It paused only once, at a gilded archway marked Hall of Earthly Curiosities. Glintor's stomach dropped. That wing was reserved for the abductees, hundreds of humans collected over centuries, housed in luxurious captivity. They were fed, entertained, occasionally interviewed for cultural insights, and generally ignored by the royal court. The Kangaroo entered. Inside, the abductees were gathered in the atrium, playing cards and arguing about which Earth decade had the worst fashion. When the Kangaroo appeared, the room fell silent. It stood there, surveying them. Then it hopped forward, slowly, deliberately, until it reached a small child from Perth, who had been taken during a beach holiday in 2147. The Kangaroo leaned down. The child reached out. Their hands met, paw to palm. The room erupted. Humans swarmed the creature, laughing, crying, hugging. They recognized it instantly, not as a threat, not as an alien, but as something familiar, something earthborn, something real. The Kangaroo didn't speak. It didn't need to. It simply sat among them, tail curled, eyes soft. It was one of them, and somehow it understood. Glintor watched from the doorway, horrified and awed. "This is bad," he muttered. "This is very, very bad." Because if the king found out that his newest acquisition was not only a mistake, but also beloved by the abductees, there would be consequences. And King Lofri, the third of his name, did not handle consequences well. Chapter 4. Royal Misunderstandings. King Lofri, the third of his name, was not a man given to nuance. His reign was defined by excess, paranoia, and a deep distrust of anything that didn't wear a crown or laugh at his jokes. His throne room was a monument to insecurity, lined with portraits of himself in increasingly improbable poses, including one where he wrestled a moon dragon into submission. He was pacing now, robes trailing like wounded pride, muttering to himself about the latest rumors. "They say the new acquisition walks upright," he growled. "They say it doesn't speak. They say it kicked a diplomat into a shrub." His spies had reported strange happenings in the Hall of Earthly Curiosities. The abductees were smiling, laughing, singing songs from Earth. And at the center of it all, an animal. "A kangaroo," hissed the king. "A beast. A mistake." He stormed through the palace, flanked by guards who had mastered the art of looking concerned without making eye contact. The corridors twisted like bad intentions. The air grew tense. Meanwhile, in the Hall of Earthly Curiosities, the kangaroo sat among the abductees like a furry oracle. It didn't speak, but it listened. It didn't command, but it led. Children leaned against its side. Adults told it stories. One elderly man from Melbourne swore the kangaroo winked at him after hearing a joke about intergalactic taxes. The creature had become a symbol, not of rebellion, not of power, but of something deeper, recognition. It was earthborn. It was real, and it hadn't forgotten them. Then the doors burst open. King Lofri entered like a thunderstorm in a bad mood. His eyes locked onto the kangaroo. His voice rose. "You, intruder, mistake, beast." The kangaroo stood slowly, tail anchoring its balance, ears twitching. "You dare sit among my collection," the king roared. "You dare defy protocol." He stepped closer, finger jabbing the air. "You are not a leader. You are not a diplomat. You are a rodent with delusions of grandeur." The kangaroo leaned back and kicked. It was not a violent kick. It was not an angry kick. It was a kick of cosmic punctuation, a full-bodied, tail-braced launch that sent King Lofri, the third of his name, sailing through the air, out the nearest palace window, and into the ornamental pond below. Silence fell. Then applause. The abductees cheered. The guards hesitated. The council, watching via emergency hologram, began drafting a motion. By Solarnian law, any being who defeated the monarch in public combat was entitled to rule. The kangaroo blinked. The council voted. Unanimously. Chapter 5. The King's Wrath. The ornamental pond outside the palace was not designed to catch falling monarchs. It was decorative, shallow, and populated by sentient koi who had strong opinions about everything. When King Lofri crashed into it headfirst, the koi filed a formal complaint with the Bureau of Pontific Pollution. Inside the palace, silence reigned. The guards stared at the shattered window. The abductees stared at the kangaroo. The kangaroo stared at nothing in particular, as if kicking tyrants through glass was just part of its morning routine. Royal Auditor Glintor Lex was the first to speak. By Solarnian law, he said, voice trembling, any being who defeats the reigning monarch in public combat is entitled to rule. The abductees erupted in cheers. The guards hesitated, then saluted. The Council of Elders, watching via emergency hologram, began drafting a coronation decree. The kangaroo blinked. The coronation was scheduled for the next day. The palace staff scrambled to adapt the ceremony for a non-verbal, non-humanoid ruler. The crown was resized. The throne was reinforced. The royal robes were replaced with a ceremonial sash that wouldn't interfere with hopping. The abductees were invited as honored guests. For the first time in centuries, they were allowed to roam the palace freely. Some wept, some danced. One man from Brisbane tried to teach the guards how to barbecue a shrimp properly. Glintor Lex watched it all with a mix of awe and impending doom. "This is either the beginning of a golden age," he muttered, "or the weirdest coup in galactic history." Meanwhile, King Lofri was fished out of the pond by a disgruntled koi and placed under palace arrest. He ranted about betrayal, rodents, and the dangers of interspecies diplomacy. No one listened. The council convened in the Chamber of Emergency Legitimacy. "Is he dead?" asked Elder Vula. "Legally," said Elder Thorn, "he's been dethroned by combat. Whether he's breathing is irrelevant." "Do we know the new king's name?" Glintor cleared his throat. "He hasn't spoken, but the abductees have begun calling him Joey. It's actually the name Earthlings use for the baby of the species, but no one is complaining." "Joey the First," Thorn mused, "has a nice ring to it." The vote was unanimous. At the coronation, the kangaroo stood on the palace balcony, tail curled, eyes calm. The crown was placed gently on his head. The sash was draped across his chest. The crowd, aliens, humans, bureaucrats, and sentient koi, cheered. Joey did not speak. He did not wave. He simply nodded once, then turned to the abductees. Glintor stepped forward. "As a gesture of goodwill," he announced, "King Joey the First has decreed that all abductees shall be returned to their planets of origin." The crowd gasped, then roared. The jester was brought home from the icy moon. The abductees packed their bags. The palace began to shift, from a prison to a sanctuary. And the kangaroo? He hopped back to the throne room, curled up on the reinforced seat, and closed his eyes. King Joey's reign had begun. Chapter 6. Legacy of the Leper. King Joey the First ruled not with words, but with presence. His court was silent, his decrees delivered through gesture, and his reforms, radical, absurd, and strangely effective, spread across Solarnia like wildfire in a bureaucratic forest. He abolished the royal tax on laughter. He converted the icy moon into a rehabilitation center for exiled jesters. He mandated that all diplomatic disputes be settled via trampoline diplomacy. And most shockingly, he declared that no being, human, alien, or marsupial, should ever be abducted without consent. The abductees were returned home in ships lined with velvet and apology. Earth received its citizens with confusion and awe. News outlets scrambled to explain the kangaroo-shaped power shift. Conspiracy theorists wept with joy. Back on Solarnia, the palace transformed. The throne room was remodeled into a sanctuary of interspecies dialogue. The crown was placed in a museum labeled Symbol of Cosmic Irony. And King Joey? He spent his days hopping through the gardens, occasionally pausing to stare at the stars, as if remembering a planet full of sunburnt chaos and misunderstood slang. The Council of Elders, once rigid and fearful, became poets. The guards became comedians. The Koi were given voting rights, and Glintor Lex, the auditor who started it all, retired quietly to a cottage on the moon, where he wrote memoirs titled How I Accidentally Crowned a Kangaroo. In time, legends spread. Children across galaxies whispered tales of the Kangaroo King, who kicked tyranny out a window and ruled with silence, strength, and a tail that could flatten empires. And somewhere in the red center of Australia, a kangaroo paused, mid-hop, looked skyward, and winked. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.